Greetings. Welcome to W4U5 Scaffolding in Instruction. In the previous unit, we understood the implementation issues and guidelines in the context of problem based instruction in engineering programs and the comparison of problem based instruction and project based instruction. The outcome of this unit is understand the nature and role of scaffolding in instruction. What is scaffolding? Scaffolding in instruction refers to the support given to a learner to help him achieve a learning outcome that he might not be able to attain on his own. So, the student has a problem in attaining the intended competency on his own or her own, but it is not too much beyond his capability to attain that competency, but the student needs some helping hand, assistance. So, that we say is scaffolding. So, it is a temporary support provided by a teacher. It could be even a peer or an instructional tool, and the support is to be gradually removed as the learners gain competence and construct their own learning strategies. The support provided initially is quite high, but as the learner improves his ability to attain the intended outcome, the support given is gradually reduced and ultimately withdrawn. So, this process promotes their autonomous and deep learning. It comes from the metaphor of construction scaffolds, temporary structures that support workers as they build something. So, like many other developments in education, for example, Bloom's taxonomy, scaffolding also was deployed originally in the context of education for children, including very young learners. Later, as its benefits became more widely understood, its use got extended to the field of higher education also. This seems to be true with most of the educational reforms. Scaffolding can be used in all the three domains of learning: cognitive, affective and psychomotor. Many people initially thought that scaffolding applies only to cognitive domain, that is problem solving kind of a scenario, but later they found that the concept of scaffolding is quite useful even in affective domain as well as psychomotor domain. The actual scaffolding strategies can vary widely in different domains. That people discovered gradually what are the strategies that work best in affective domain and the strategies that work best in psychomotor domain. But in all cases, the scaffolding is gradually withdrawn as learners construct their own cognitive, affective and psychomotor learning skills and are able to attain the intended learning outcomes on their own. This is a key feature. Scaffolding was inspired by Vygotsky's theory of zone of proximal development or ZPD. Though Vygotsky himself never explicitly used the term scaffolding, Vygotsky talks of zone of proximal development, but he did not use the word scaffolding. In fact, if you remember, we noted the contribution of Vygotsky in an earlier unit on social constructivism. Okay. Vygotsky developed his theory of ZPD in the context of instruction for very young children, particularly in the area of development of language skills. Though the basic philosophy of ZPD has remained same since Vygotsky's formulation, the details and scope have been changing subsequently towards more generalization. ZPD scope got expanded. So, what does ZPD really represent? It represents the space between what a learner is capable of doing unsupported on his own or her own without any external support, what the learner can do. That is one zone. And there is another zone where the learner cannot do even with support. So, there are two zones. If you see in this figure, the innermost one is current understanding can work unassisted. So, that is his current level of competence. If you see the outermost zone, that is out of reach. Right now, given the present level of capability or competency of the learner, she will not be able to reach that outer zone even if help is provided. In between these two zones, there is a zone of proximal development, where right now the learner is not able to do the tasks in that zone, but with appropriate support, the learner can acquire those competencies. So, in this area, through scaffolding, learner can obtain the intended expertise. So, ZPD is that zone of proximal development. Now, ZPD has become synonymous with the term scaffolding in the literature. However, the term scaffolding was introduced by Wood, Brunner and Ross in 1976. So, scaffolding and ZPD, though are quite related, are really distinct. Okay. So, ZPD represents the space between what a learner is capable of doing unsupported at the current level of competence and what the learner cannot do even with support. So, thus it is the space where the learner can attain the intended learning outcomes with the assistance of the instructor. Once the learner reaches this stage, the assistance of the instructor can be completely removed. Scaffolding is no more required. Vygotsky's recommendation was that the instruction is most effective when it focuses on this space of ZPD. As I mentioned, Vygotsky, who formulated the theory of ZPD, did not mention scaffolding, and the original proponents of scaffolding, who are Wood, Brunner and Ross, did not immediately link it with ZPD either. So, more or less these two concepts evolved independently in the context of learning by young children. However, later they saw the connection between these two. So, in the original formulation, Wood and his colleagues defined scaffolding in a more practical, pragmatic way rather than from a theoretical standpoint. So, they defined scaffolding as a process that enables a child or novice to solve a task or achieve a goal that would be beyond his unassisted efforts. That is the key, unassisted efforts. So, their description of scaffolding was practical rather than theoretical. The link between this idea of ZPD and this concept of scaffolding actually got established later by researchers like Brunner, Kasdan and others. Scaffolding is highly relevant in engineering programs and quite useful. Cognitive load on students is generally very high when they face complex, open-ended and interdisciplinary tasks, which generally is the case in engineering programs, particularly if project based instruction or problem based instruction or strategies like this are being adopted, then the cognitive load on the students can be quite high, and scaffolding can be very helpful in making the students attain the intended outcomes. Collaborative and interdisciplinary work is essential for engineering graduates In fact, these are included in the program outcomes defined by NBA also. Students may be quite unfamiliar with and find it challenging to get used to innovative approaches to instruction. As we just now mentioned, project based approach to instruction or problem based approach to instruction or simulation based approach to instruction, etc. So, in all these cases, scaffolding can be quite useful, and it is being used quite widely these days. What are the key features of scaffolding? Instruction must focus on the learner's zone of proximal development, ZPD. Immediately from this concept follow two corollaries. One, scaffolding must be focused. That is, it must focus on areas where the learner struggles. It must be the zone between what the learner can do by himself and what the learner is not able to do even with assistance. So, it is the area where the learner can do, but with assistance. So, it must focus on those areas. And then, because the individuals can differ widely in their capacity to adapt to scaffolding, the scaffolding itself must be adjustable. It must change based on learner's needs. So, it does place some load on the instructor, but for scaffolding to be effective, it must be based on the specific learner's needs. That is one key feature and its corollaries. The other feature is temporary. It must be removed when no longer needed. Once the learner acquires the intended ability, the scaffolding must be completely withdrawn. The learner becomes autonomous. The interaction between the learner and the expert should be collaborative for scaffolding to be effective. This is very important again. That is, a corollary is that it is not like wisdom is simply imparted and it is received by the learner. It is more a collaborative. So, the corollary of this is that scaffolding empowers the learners, builds confidence, competence and autonomy. So, the scaffolding's role is to make the learner autonomous. Uses of scaffolding in engineering programs, as we mentioned, quite extensively it is being used, and it is possible to use scaffolding in several areas. It can be used in problem solving, it can be used in project work and design activities, it can be used to help the learners become comfortable with the use of modern tools. Many of the modern tools have so many diverse features that certain amount of scaffolding will make it easy for them to master the tools in relatively shorter time periods. And collaborative and team based work, it can be used even in other domains as we mentioned. So, it can be used when ethical reasoning is involved. So, there are several areas where scaffolding can be quite helpful. Scaffolding can be used not only in the traditional classroom settings, face to face instruction in the classroom, but it can also be used in online classes and blended mode scenarios. Of course, the tools, the methodologies change, but people have found that scaffolding can be used quite effectively and efficiently in online classes as well as in blended scenarios. Some of the examples of use of scaffolding we will look at now. Scaffolding in problem solving. Students are generally given real world engineering problems that are complex, fuzzy and open ended. Students may find the resulting cognitive load quite heavy, overwhelming. This is particularly relevant in instructional approaches like problem based instruction. So, scaffolding is recommended in such situations. There can be several approaches. For example, we can start with a less complex and clear problem and gradually make it more complex, fuzzy and closer to reality. And in this entire process, assistance can be provided to the learners. The instructor can help the students in breaking down the problem into manageable sub problems, another way of providing scaffolding. Another problem that students have these days is the explosion of information. There are any number of references that you can get if you do a proper search, but which of these references are really useful, helpful, valid and easy to use, the students may not know. So, there could be considerable wastage of time when the students to look for helpful literature. So, instructor can provide scaffolding by way of providing curated literature. So, good resources on which the student can rely can be provided. So, another form of scaffolding is provide curated literature. Introduce the student to useful tools, this already we mentioned, and provide them access to such tools. If the tools are open source, you can ensure that they are installed in the laboratories and students are given access to such tools. Provide solution outlines to simpler problems first, another form of scaffolding. Provide useful templates for use in the problem solving process. So, the instructor can provide the templates and this will certainly help the student in the process of solving the problems. Provide model guidelines on defining constraints, checking compliance with statutory regulations, etc. For all these activities, the teachers can provide some kind of model guidelines. Again, we emphasize scaffolding is gradually removed and ultimately withdrawn completely as students assume full responsibility for their learning. How is scaffolding useful in project work or design activities? If students are undertaking project work in the initial semesters of the engineering program, they may have difficulty in understanding design process. As we mentioned in an earlier unit on project based approach to instruction, students working on projects in their final year as part of capstone project may not have too much difficulty, but if the students are in the initial semesters, first year, second year or even third year, they may have difficulty in understanding the design process. Scaffolding can provide design frameworks. Example, engineering design process steps. They can give a template, they can give a broad framework. So, this all is part of providing scaffolding. Rubrics can be communicated upfront and explained so that the students become comfortable with what is expected of them at the end of their project work or design work. Checklists can be provided to help the students with verification and validation tasks. Checklists in fact are quite useful for the learners. Guided brainstorming can be organized during the project work. Students are supposed to engage in brainstorming. The instructor can provide appropriate guidance to ensure that the brainstorming gets organized in a structured way and proves useful. So, scaffolding is quite useful here also. Again we emphasize gradually scaffolding can be removed and students make independent design choices and trade-offs. Scaffolding can be useful even in the use of modern tools. That use of modern tools is becoming increasingly important is quite evident. Most of the modern problem solving techniques depend on the use of increasingly complex, sophisticated and powerful tools. These include not only traditional ones like CAD, MATLAB, simulation, etc., but also the more recent ones based on AI. In fact, artificial intelligence is making huge inroads into the design of tools that help the learners as well as instructors. So, the tools which are based on AI need training for them to be used effectively. So, scaffolding can help the students master these tools. Scaffolding can include tutorials with sample problems, scripted code templates or partially completed models, checkpoints for debugging or troubleshooting, exposure to modern skills like prompt engineering for use with generative AI tools. Okay. In fact, prompt engineering is becoming almost a separate discipline by itself. Collaborative and team based work. We already notice that current engineering education emphasizes collaborative and team based work. Scaffolds include role assignment guidelines. How do the students choose the roles, or how are the roles assigned to the students? Example, project manager, a research lead, a coder, a tester, a person responsible for documentation. So, how are these roles to be assigned? Scaffolding can provide assistance in this area. Collaboration tools and communication protocols, conflict resolution processes, guided presentation sessions evaluated using appropriate rubrics. In all these tasks, scaffolding can help the students. Ethical reasoning is an essential learning outcome for engineering students. This is again included in the program outcomes of NBA also. Examples of scaffolded activities: case study analysis with guiding questions, structured debates on engineering failures or dilemmas. So, debate can be organized, students participate in the debate, but the scaffolding ensures that the debate is well structured and does not go off the track. The students are provided enough helpful support to ensure that the debate becomes meaningful. Reflection prompts before open discussion. This is another form of scaffolding. How do we use scaffolding in online blended contexts? In fact, scaffolding may become more important in online blended contexts compared to conventional face-to-face instructional settings, because the students are not having direct interaction with the faculty in online or blended context. When the part of it is online, scaffolding may be much more important to ensure that the instruction becomes efficient. Students may feel isolated or overwhelmed in the absence of personal and physical interaction with instructors and peers. So, the very flexibility of time and space, which is supposed to be a feature of online learning, for example, that very flexibility of time and space may lead to disorganization or confusion for the learners. So, what can be the scaffolding strategies? There are many. Show a module map that shows progression of competencies of a learning outcome. So, a kind of a map is provided as to how the module is structured and what will be the progression of the competencies. Provide as a scaffold templates for laboratory reports, design specifications, test reports, etc. So, this kind of a template can be quite helpful for the learners. During project work, provide scaffold for frequent quizzes, short reflections, peer reviews, early formative feedback, etc. Of course, all these scaffolding activities become quite less taxing for the faculty if appropriate tools are used. For example, if we use a tool like Moodle, then it becomes very easy to organize these kind of activities. That will be discussed in a later unit, Moodle, but such tools would be quite helpful. So, leverage tools like this, even virtual laboratories, Google Docs, LMS like Moodle, they will be quite useful. Chat rooms, these can be used appropriately. Use surveys to adjust the level of scaffolding that the students need. So, to summarize, scaffolding in instruction can play an effective and versatile role in several contexts. Instructor's role is critical for its success. Instructors themselves may need to be trained appropriately, because the instructor's role is more of a collaborator with the learner. So, certain kind of an attitude is required from the part of the instructor also. So, instructors themselves may also need to be trained appropriately in the art of scaffolding. Institute must provide necessary resources like tools, training, etc. The role of scaffolding becomes more significant in innovative approaches. As we already mentioned, when the instructional approach is conventional one, scaffolding is still useful, but scaffolding becomes much more important when innovative approaches to instruction are deployed. For example, project based approach to instruction, problem based approach to instruction, experiential approach to instruction, simulation based approach to instruction. In all these contexts, scaffolding becomes much more significant and useful. So, that completes our discussion of scaffolding. In the next unit, we will understand some more instructional approaches, including a model of direct instruction, instruction based approach for design thinking, and simulation based approach to instruction. Thank you.